Today we're going to talk about Notebook 6 and more about table tools that we're going to learn. All right, and so go ahead and get Notebook 6 open and go ahead and run that initial code block. And then we're going to learn about two important methods we can use, especially for category variables called .group and .pivot. Okay, so here I am in Notebook 6. All right, and I'm going to run this initial code block and notice that we are importing the data science and NumPy, and we also are looking at a new possibility, scipy.stats as stats. Okay, so we have another package here that will be helpful, a bunch of things that we can use. All right. Now, first, we're going to talk about lists, okay? And lists are very much like arrays. Okay, except instead of columns, they're in rows, all right? So again, we have an array here, and then we have this list that's a column with my array in it. So it's got this array in its first element. And then this text, what is going on is second, and then the -10, and then the 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what's this all about? Well, it turns out that we can create a table using lists, okay? So this is the way that we did before. Um, we used columns with columns. Well, it turns out that we also have this function, this method called with rows, and so we can add these in, okay? And look what it does. So it has taken these rows of data and put them in one in each column, okay? Now, do we have to do it with rows? No. And it turns out that we don't do this very often, okay? So as a matter of fact, it turns out that we almost never use with rows, okay, in the course, but we do use with columns all the time. So you should know that with rows is another way to go. And as always, we're going to use table.readTable to import data files. So the first key learning thing we're going to talk about today is the .group method, okay? And what do I mean by category data? Well, for example, freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors in high school or college, those are category variables, right? Um, and male and female, what race or ethnicity category you fit in is a category variable. Um, these are all examples of category data, all right? And it turns out that the dot group method is extremely good. And it turns out that we have this way to go ahead and not just get the counts. Okay, so you'll see in just a second that the dot group method, it kind of defaults to give us the counts, how many individuals from the data set, how many rows in the data set are represented in that particular category. But instead of getting the counts, we can get the average, or honestly, lots of functions. We can get the max, the min, the median, the sum. All right, so there is a ton of stuff we can do. And also we'll take a look at how to create a horizontal bar graph after grouping to get some really cool visual effects. All right, so let's take a look at this in the notebook, all right? So the very first thing we're doing is we're loading this welcome survey version 4.csv using the table.read table, and we're doing survey.show5. So again, it's a long table. There's over 1,300 rows in this table. So the show5, of course, is just showing us the first few rows so we can kind of see what we have here. Okay, so survey.group sleep position. Okay, so sleep position is a category variable. And so what it's going to do is this is going to go in and find all the different people. So we have 302 people who sleep primarily on their back, and 374 people who sleep on the left side, 434 that sleep on the right side, and stomach, 202. Okay, so that's what the dot group is used for. And like I said, basically the default is to give us a count. It tells us how many of these rows, right, have this on your back selected in the sleep position column, and how many have on your left side in the sleep position column. Okay, so we can see the breakdowns. Let me get rid of the ink here. Now check this out, okay? So now we're going to group based on sleep position, which is exactly what we have up above. But notice that we're going to sort based on count. And I'm going to put a hashtag in here that'll comment out this last thing. So let's see what the sort based on count does. Okay, that makes sense. It takes this column and it sorts. And we did the descending equals true. Okay, so it puts the 434 at the top down to stomach. So on your right side is the most popular sleep position of these students who were surveyed. All right, so now let's take the bar H, and you can see we do this a lot. We often sort and then do bar H. Notice that, okay, so these methods, when we stack them, they happen from left to right. So it does the grouping first, and then it does the sort, and the last thing it does is the bar H, okay? But notice that when it gets to the bar H command, this is the table that it has available to it. It's not the big table up here, right? It's this table from the grouping table, okay? So when we execute all of the stuff, I'm getting rid of the ink. When we execute all of these commands, what happens? Oh, so it takes the display. So here, let's comment it out again. So this is what it was. We had the grouping table, right? So we get the grouping table, we sort it, and then when we make the bar graph, it shows the categories in descending order, and you can see, approximately how many individuals are in each of these categories. And we do this a lot. This is called a Pareto bar graph when we sort from least to greatest. All right. And we do this a lot, especially with the bar H, using the bar H after the grouping. And then a dot sort, we can show, the top 10, the top 5 of whatever, of the categories or what have you. So it's a really useful thing. I would pay attention to that. Now we're gonna do the same thing, but we're gonna group based on the variable sleep position. And notice this. NP mean. Okay, so that's an option. We put a comma after we designate the column that we want to group by. And if we put in a function, we get the average. Okay, so the extroversion average. It does every single thing in the table. It does number of textees average. It does hours of sleep average. Okay, now notice it can't do year mean or handedness mean because those are category variables, not numbers, right? It can't actually calculate the mean of those categories. So let's get rid of the ink. All right. And just notice that we can also do the max, right? Any particular one. And it's kind of weird. They're actually doing max based on the alphabetical nature of this, I think. I don't know. Or maybe it has more characters. I don't know how it's doing your max. I wouldn't trust it. Again, the maximum value when the values aren't numbers might be a bit suspicious, okay? But there you go. So we can do sum, we can do max, we can do min, we can do median, whatever we'd like. Again, your notebook came with, oh, and by the way, NP mean, I said this in the last video, right? NP mean in this class, 99.9% of the time, it's the same thing as NP average. Actually, 100% of the time, I think it works out the same. And remember, you can get help on a function by doing help and then calling the function. Okay. And I'm not going to go through reading all of this. It is helpful, and there are examples at the bottom. So it's a good way to get help if you'd like it. All right, so survey.select sleep position. Okay, so why are we doing this? Let me just do this. Okay, so we got sleep position and then hours of sleep. So we group, so here we're going to group based on sleep position and we're going to do average. Okay, so we're going to see based on sleep position who gets the most hours of sleep. Okay, so notice that this is all the same thing. All we've done is add a bar H. So we're doing a horizontal bar graph based on the sleep position column. And what's that going to look like? It turns out, you can see from the bars, there's almost no difference in how much sleep people get based on their sleep position. Okay, there's tiny little differences, but not very much. And now we're doing survey.select years and hours of sleep. Here, let me throw in a hashtag and so we can see this as it goes. All right, so we have a 2-column table because we've selected 2 columns here, year and hours of sleep. Then we're going to group based on year with an NP average in there. That's interesting. Okay. So we group and we find the average hours of sleep for each of them. Okay. And then we sort based on the hours of sleep. Okay. And what are we doing? The last thing we're tacking on is the bar H year, which is going to do what? It's just going to take this table basically and turn it into a bar graph. And we do year. Year is the categories that it's going to make bars for. And up here, it's just showing the table so we can see. And yes, there's very little difference in the hours of sleep, but we have sorted this. It does look sorted, but we didn't sort it, did we? Oh, there it is. Sorry. Yeah, we did sort hours of sleep average. Okay. So there you go. That's a quick run through of how to use the dot group. And we also got the introduction there to dot bar H, the horizontal bar graph. Okay. Which we said we would use. And it turns out that we can use group for 2 category variables. Now I'm going to say I really like dot pivot when I have 2 category variables, but we can also use the dot group method. And there's this trick here that I do the same basic input, but I have to put the 2 categories when I'm doing dot group with 2 categories, 2 category variables. I have to put the names of both columns in there. Okay. But collecting this statistic is really easy still. Okay, so let's go through that. Let me get rid of the ink and we can go through that in the notebook. So notice that we're doing this, right? We're putting in square brackets, we're putting in handedness and sleep position. So we're going to group based on those. And at the moment, I'm going to take out the NP mean just so you can see what's happening. Okay. And so with just the counts, it should be clear that we have, so we have both hands. These are ambidextrous people. These are left-handed people. These are right-handed people. Okay. So we have 3 different types of handedness. And then we have 4 sleep positions. Okay. So it groups first by handedness and then by sleep position because we put handedness first and then we put sleep position. And then it shows us the counts in every single one of those categories. All right. Then let's go back and put in the NP mean. So it's going to replace, what does it do? It, instead of doing this count column, and I'm going to get rid of the ink here, instead of doing the count column, it's going to do the average. Average of what? Well, the average of everything else in the table. So let's see how that goes. There you go. So notice that for year, it can't do anything. It just leaves these blank. And then it does the means for extroversion, for number of textees, and for hours of sleep. Okay. So So this is interesting, but it's a lot of data. And sometimes when, I mean, these data tables are cool that it can do all of these columns at once, but that can be hard to dig through. So what's this doing? Well, here we're dropping the year, okay? And it turns out it's going to be almost identical, right? Except it doesn't have that empty column in it, okay? So remember, make array, make underscore array, and then survey select. So we're selecting 4 columns, handedness, sleep position, and hours of sleep. And we're grouping based on handedness and sleep position. And we're sorting based on counts with the show all, so we see everything. Okay. Now I want you to notice this is rather busy, right? And there are 4 counts for each of the 3 kinds of handedness, both left-handed and right-handed. But check this out, pivot. The dot pivot method is made to deal with 2 category variables. So here we go with sleep position and handedness. Okay, let me get rid of the ink and scroll up a bit so we can see the output. Now this gives us 12 numbers as well. Okay, so for the handedness, right, there are three different kinds of handedness, and then there are 4 categories of handedness, and it gives me those counts. So it's the same numbers as displayed above, but the pivot table is also called a two-way table, and I find it extremely useful for category variables, right? It's really clear that we have the sleep position across the top, and down the left-hand side, we have the handedness categories, right? So it's a real easy way to see the counts in the categories. But it's a little bit harder to get the statistics, right? So the collect equals, we're telling it to collect the average. So we can get the average. The average of what? Well, let's take a look. This is why we selected 3 specific columns, right? So the only thing it can be collecting is hours of sleep. That's the only other thing in this table. Okay, we're grouping by handedness and sleep position. We're doing the pivot by handedness and sleep position. So when we do the collect NP means, what are we getting? I've got to look at this again. Oh, I see. So we've dropped the year. Okay. Both on your back. 6.125. So this is what I was just checking. It is the hours of sleep. Oh, there we go. I'm sorry. This is what I was not seeing. We tell it which column to collect from. Okay, so values is the name of a column to collect values from. And then collect equals, what kind of values are we collecting? I am very sorry. But there you go. That is the right example, and that is why it's hours of sleep. And I just double checked. This was the correct number for hours of sleep on your back if your handedness type was both. All right, and again, you can get help on table.pivot this way. So for these table methods, you often have to put the table dot in as a placeholder so you can get help on the dot pivot method. And then let's look at this to do select handedness, sleep position, hours of sleep. We do group hand. Okay, this is going to give us the same thing as above, right? And notice that what did we do? We only selected 3 columns. And then when we grouped on 2 of them, it left the 3rd column as the one it was going to get the NP average from. Okay. So there are pluses and minuses for using Dot pivot and dot group. I really like dot pivot, but admittedly, it's a little bit harder to collect those statistics values that we need. But dot group has a little bit of a drawback. It's a little harder to get grouping to happen for 2 variables or 3 variables or 4. And it's still pretty easy to collect the statistic that we want. Okay. So, and I've said most of this just quickly, we'll cover this, right? The classic name for this pivot method, what it creates is a two-way table. That's what we call it in applied statistics. Okay? And here's the trick, right? We have to tell it a column name to collect values from, and then we have to tell it the statistic we want to collect. Okay, so that's the details on the pivot method. All right, and the only thing that's left in this notebook is they give us some challenge questions. Okay, so you can pause the video and try them on your own, and it'd be great practice if you want to do it. I'll be back in just a second and go over some of those. So let's look at the challenge questions, okay? So actually, sorry about this. There are some hints here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and hit the plus sign a couple of times. All right, so the first thing we need is the sky table. It's the skyscrapers. Okay, and for each city, what's the tallest building for each material? Okay, so let's see if we can do this. Sky.group based on material. And I forget exactly how that is spelled. Sky is not defined, so I've got to execute that. Material is lowercase m. Material. Okay, so it's going to group based on material, right? But what did it say? It said, what's the tallest building? Okay, so I just put in a comma max. Boom. And there we go. I can see for each material, concrete, mixed, and steel, what the tallest building is, and it even gives the name of the building and the city where it's in. So, and how old it is. Okay. So again, just a straightforward use of the group. All right. For each city, what's the height difference between the tallest steel building and the tallest concrete building? This will be interesting. Okay. Again, pause the video and see if you can figure this out. Okay. So I'm thinking about this. For each city, what is the height difference between the tallest steel building and the tallest concrete building? So sky.group based on material. Oh, and that's a lowercase m. You see, I put a capital M. This is why I always suggest when we can to copy paste. Okay. Um, so it didn't like that. Okay. The tallest steel building and the tallest concrete building. Oh, we have the information here. I tried it. So we have the information. We want the tallest, sorry, I've got to go back up and read the question. The tallest steel building and the tallest concrete building. Okay, so the tallest steel. Okay. So the difference we can go and get the column that we need. Okay, so column, and we can call it height max. Okay. And what do we want? Tallest steel and tallest concrete. Okay, tallest steel. So that's going to be the third thing in the list. Okay. So we can do dot item 3 minus, and then we can do the same thing again and get the same exact table and the same exact column. And then we want item 0. And I said item 3. It's the third item, but it's item 2 because um, the computer starts counting at 0. So what's it going to do? It's going to do 442 minus 425. So that's going to be a little less than 17 if I got this right, I believe. 16.64. Yes, I'm supposed to do tallest steel minus tallest concrete. Okay, and it turned out that this one was bigger, so I didn't have to do an absolute value. But again, these are just using the methods that we've learned. And last time we learned about this dot item. Okay, so I'm using the dot column to pull this out as an array, and I'm using the dot item to pull out the numbers I need to help answer the question. And you can see down here that there are some answers shown about what we have. Okay, and first they did a select just to take 3 of the columns, and now when they do the pivot, notice that they only have to put comma max because there is only one thing to take, one column to take the values from, so we don't have to tell it values and collect. We can just say max. Okay. And then here they're doing the difference, and notice they do absolute value. So my table, the first thing they do is they create my table. And let me just hashtag this and you can see, oh, so they get this table from the skyscrapers. And then what do? Well, they go in and they grab the column the same way that I did. And they do -3, -1. Boom. There we go. Okay, so you can take a look at the rest of these. They do help and show different ways to go about doing these. All right. And again, try to challenge yourself. And you'll learn a lot as you go through the rest of this notebook.